And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 54. Tonight we're going to be talking about, and one of these days I'm actually going to have this one lined up. We're going to be talking about a photo shoot I did at the open book called It's Full of Stars in a bookshop with the wonderful Helena and a book full of stars. We are also going to be doing a critique section in the second part of the podcast, where VG, we're going to be, has created this little still life with a treasure chest and jewellery and coins, was wanting a little bit of insight into or thoughts on how it could maybe be cropped or presented. So I'm going to chat a little bit about that. We also have Benedito sent in this picture of the loch, the boathouse, the goose, but then sort of set about re-editing it, and so we're going to take a little look at that. Bob put in a picture with a bee in mid-flight, but said that he's often in debate with people about whether the wings should be blurred or captured sharp. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and if you've got thoughts, you can certainly put them in the comments. Inga put in a couple of versions of this photo, one which was darker, one which was lighter, and she was sort of wondering, both seem to have strengths and weaknesses, and so she was wanting a little bit of feedback on that, so we're going to discuss that as well. Similarly, Roy put in a couple of photos of the wind turbines and at slightly different shutter speeds. So again, talking about the benefits of shutter speed, really. And also Jim was playing around with creating a composite, putting marbles onto a beach from an idea that he'd seen before, and he thought he'd give it a go, but he was wanting some kind of feedback on where he was going with that. So we're going to play around with that a little bit as well. So that's pretty much what we're talking about this evening. And of course, we are here live on Facebook. So leave a comment. Let me know you're here. And if this is your first time, let me know where you're from as well. It's always good to know where in the world people are tuning in from. If you happen to find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining, whatever, but you would like to support them on some level, then do please go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres. It's not compulsory, but it is always appreciated. Right, now, I seem to have got my own face talking at me about 15 seconds behind where I am, so I'll just scroll that down a little bit because it gets a little bit confusing. So, as I said, it's one of those weird things with the way Facebook works. It's essentially there's something like between a 15 and 20 second delay between when I say something and it actually appears up on the screen. So if I've got my picture up at the same time, it really confuses me because I switch things and it hasn't switched yet. Right, okay, well, we have a few comments. Got a few of you in already, so that's always lovely. So my wife has posted first, going, "Evening, everyone from here in Castle Douglas." Roy has come in. "Hello, all from God's own country." Now, given that most counties in Britain tend to call themselves God's own country as well, doesn't narrow it down that much. Morven says, "Hello from Dumfries." Sandra, "Hello, everyone from Birmingham." Pat's here. Yay, we made it this time, Pat. Excellent. Jim from Dumfries says, "Hi, Kim and everybody." Jackie from South Africa has made it along as well. Robert's in saying, "Howdy from Texas." Ben is, "Hello, folks from Edinburgh." Jill, "Hi from Yorkshire." VG is, "Good evening, everyone from India." And Bettina is here from Buenos Aires. How wonderful. Glad you could make it along, Bettina. And Ray, actually, Bettina kind of is a bit of a link to the first picture that I'm going to talk about, because now a few of you may remember from a few weeks back, I did a picture at a place called the Open Book. Actually, I will. Yeah, here we go. And this was the one that I was talking about at the time. Now, If you weren't around for that episode, I can't remember, it might be episode 50 or episode 49, but you can flip back and take another look. The main thing about that was it was taken in the open book in Wigtown, and Wigtown, small town, roughly about sort of 35 miles ish from where I live. Its population of about 900 people, has something like about 13 second-hand bookstores, including a place called The Bookshop, which is the biggest second-hand bookshop in Scotland. Now, one of the things they also happen to do is there's an Airbnb that you can rent called The Open Book, which is a small second-hand bookshop with a little one-bedroom flat above it. Now, people from all over the world book to kind of come and stay. It's amazing the number of people who sort of have these dreams of what would it be like if one day I could just have my own second-hand bookshop to run. And this is your chance to try it out. I'll put a link in the comments at some point, or certainly in the description. So afterwards, or if you're watching this on YouTube, you can, I'll put it in the description as well. So you can kind of click through and go and check it out if you want. It's an amazing place. And I was out there a couple of years ago to do a bunch of photos using the bookshop as a place to do stuff, to shoot a whole bunch of different kinds of photos. And the amazing thing about a bookshop is there's just so many different kinds of photos that you can do, so many different scenarios and scenes and narratives you can create. And considering that a bookshop is books, it's all about stories. To create stories in a shop full of stories is something rather wonderful. It really allows your imagination to go wild. Now, the connection with Bettina from Buenos Aires is Bettina happened to be staying in the bookshop at the time. So that was kind of fun. Now, I did actually take a photo of her as well in the shop. I'm not going to show that tonight. I'll probably do that in a few weeks' time. But what I did do was, in addition to the photo I was showing you the other week, is I decided to do this shot of Helena. It was one of these things that I've seen variations on this kind of photo before, and what essentially what you do is you have a book and you stick an off-camera flash tucked down so it lights up the face. But it's that idea of the world of storytelling coming out of the book and just lighting up the face. Now, this, in fact, for those interested in the lighting setup, was done with 3 off-camera flashes. So the one we've just talked about, I've got, is tucked down just inside the book that Helena is holding open. Second one is actually tucked into the lamp at the back, because the lamp itself, the light just wasn't strong enough. Everything else was sort of to really light everything up. So what I did was I put an orange gel on the flash, and then the light bulb wasn't in, so I sort of balanced it in, and then it's that which goes off, which creates that wonderful lamp lighting up. But because both of those lights were the other side behind the book, it meant that the front of the book and Helena's hand here and what have you just got lost completely in shadow. So I had a third flash just off to my right, off to my left, left as you're looking at the picture, to one side, which lit up her hand, the book, and caught a little bit of the edging of the books as well that were getting lost in shadow otherwise. So, and then the final bit was I overlaid a whole bunch of stars and galaxies and everything into the picture as though it was flying out of the book. These pictures I got, well, that's, you see Spiral Galaxy there, I think come from the Hubble telescope, and I got off the NASA website, where it's full of royalty-free, copyright-free images which you're allowed to use. What I also did was I took a couple of those pictures as well, and I overlaid them onto the cover of the book, because it wasn't actually a star book Helena had. And the reason for doing stars was because Helena herself is a young astrophotographer. She's absolutely besotted with stars. She has a telescope in her garden. She's got her own YouTube channel all about looking at the stars, how to take photographs of stars. She's got a Facebook page. And again, what I will do is I will put these links into the comments or the description afterwards. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what, I think I do have them just now. So if I just copy that and go here and paste that into the comments. So those of you who are watching live on Facebook, hopefully they should just kind of crop up into the comments now, and you can come back to it and follow the links after the podcast. But like I say, what I'll do is in the YouTube version, I'll stick them in the description as well. So where are we? Let's go back to that photo. So because stars are a huge thing, but we thought what we could do with this picture is create universes and galaxies coming out of the book. And so that was and then this photo's been sort of borrowed and used quite a lot. DG Unlimited, Dumfries and Galloway Unlimited, which is a kind of it's an arts organisation in Dumfries and Galloway. They've used this on their website, and it's a fun, interesting photo. So what I thought I would do next is I'll just briefly show you how it worked in Photoshop. Essentially, the different layers that I did for it. So what you can see here is this is the original layer. This is like the photo as it was in the camera. And the next thing that I did was we've got things like an overhead a light up here which just sort of grabs the attention. We've got a couple of these books where the flash is catching it and it's just looking kind of way too bright. So I removed the light in Photoshop and I darkened down some of those books that were catching the light. Then the next thing I did was I did a little bit of vignette to just kind of darken down the edges here, and then I did a little overlay down the bottom here to kind of create a darker patch down here. Now I'm not sure how that will appear on your screen. For some people that might be a bit too black, but on my screen at least you can still make out the detail of Helena's sitting there cross-legged on the carpet. Next thing I did was in fact, actually, I can break that down a little bit more, I think. So you can see here that, okay, let's zoom in a little bit. So the original, what we wanted was we had a book big enough for to put the flash behind it. Now this one was a voyage around the world in paintings, which wasn't really the mood we were going for. So you can see that what I've done is taken a picture, I've put it onto here, darkened it a bit, put that one on, darkened it all a bit as well. They were originally quite bright, so I darkened them down. And then the next level was to stick the stars in. So, oh yeah, with this one actually, there's a galaxy as well, which I just sort of put in to sort of brighten that area up. Finally, I think, yeah, the stars themselves, yeah, that part there you can see is still part of the galaxy, and then we put in all these extra stars. And that then is how we ended up with that photo. So we went from that was the original to that being the final image. So a lot of fun. Like I say, if ever you get a chance to access a bookshop as a place for doing a photo shoot, absolutely go for it. You can do pretty much anything you like. They're amazing stages, venues for creativity. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show you about that. Just give you this kind of introduction to how you can kind of play around a little bit with lights and layers and a bookshop. Right, okay, what I'll do, I'll take a quick flip back, see what other comments we've got. Oh, Benedito says hi from Chichester. Bettina says happy to join you. I'm glad you could make it. Pat is saying she's from Minehead in Somerset. and then we've got the link that I put in. So I'm not sure if anybody else has commented since it's not turned up yet. No problem. Right, okay. So one of the next things I wanted to talk about, one of these really weird things next actually, it's not on the list of things that I started talking about at the beginning, but one of the, some of you may have, do you remember a couple of years ago there was a big thing about this dress? Was it blue and silver or gold and green or something like, I can't remember the exact colours, and there was this sort of big raging controversy about it, and I never really knew what was going on, and just the whole thing seemed a bit silly, so I pretty much ignored it. And then the other day, a friend of mine stuck up a photo of a trainer or sneaker, and apparently, you know, to some people it looks grey or green, and to some people it looks pink or white. So I'm going to put this up now, and I want you to write in the comments how you see it. So this is the picture. Don't worry too much about the bit of writing at the top. It's saying whether you're left or right hemisphere or whatever. But here's the picture. So is it a grey sneaker with green edging and lace, or is it a pink one with white sole and lace? And to me, it was absolutely obvious, and I couldn't see for a moment why anybody could possibly see it in any other way. And yet, apparently, people are going, oh no, it's definitely green and grey. Oh no, it's definitely white and pink. And it was, you know, people were kind of siding up with each other, almost like whether they were going to be voting Republican or Democrat. And and yet it's but I thought, now for me it was really obvious. Like I say, there was only one way I could possibly look at this. And so I then dragged it into Photoshop, and I moved a slider, one of the colour sliders, and where it moved from green grey to pink white and back again, depending on which way I moved it. And I thought, well, that's it. This is down to your monitor. It's all absolutely going to depend on what monitor you are using as to whether you see this as grey and green or pink and white. And I would absolutely have put money on that. I don't know how much money I would have put on, but certainly I would have easily put £10 on. I could have put £50 on. I'm not a huge gambler, but I was absolutely certain in my assumption of what colour that was. And then Maggie came into the room and said, what are you doing? And I showed her, and she said it was the other one. Clear as day to her. Absolutely, it wasn't what I saw. And that surprised the hell out of me, I have to say. So I'm hoping now that, having talked for more than 20 seconds, that I will have caught up, and some of you now will have had a chance to go and take a look. And what have we got here? So Ben says green, Morven says grey and green, Robert says pink and white with green subtle outline, Jackie says green, Sandra says grey green, Bettina says pink and white, Jill says grey with green, Jim says pink and white, Maggie says pink and white. There you go. Maggie said pink and white. I thought grey and green. Roy says grey and green. Pat says pink and white. VG says peach. / pink with white. Green undertones, I feel, is in the shadow. John Thompson has come in. Hi, John. Says very light pink with very light green. Ah, you're going for that funny middle ground, are you? And VG says, Pat says, yes, VG, I can see the green undertones. And Maggie has said pretty much the same thing. That, you know, yeah, you could kind of see. So let's flip back to here. I would have absolutely put money on that being grey and green. I can barely, maybe a hint of pink in the grey, but I just can't see it. I mean, it's grey. It's grey and green, and like to the point whereby if it hadn't been for the fact that my wife, who I do trust, and I trust her senses, and I trust that she's not going to mess around with me on this one, and she's sitting next to me looking at this on exactly the same monitor, and she goes, no, it's pink and white. maybe a little bit of green in the, like some of you have said, in the shadows or just in this kind of hint of white, but basically it's a pink and white. And I just find that absolutely fascinating. And I don't really have an answer. According to the bit of blurb on here, it says it depends whether you're left brain or right brain dominant. That I think is maybe, it might be a little bit more controversial. I'm not entirely sure. The friend who put it up, she said she'd seen it in both pink and white and then green and grey. And I think I saw somebody else talk about that they'd seen it both ways depending on whether they'd been kind of in a heightened emotional state. They'd seen it in pink and white, and then when they were feeling calmer, they could only see it in grey and green. But I just don't know. The reality is I don't have an answer for this. I just find it absolutely fascinating. But I suppose really what becomes really important is, as a photographer, because let's face it, that's what this podcast is about, and that's why I put it on. I'm putting this on instead of sharing cat videos. It's not just about sharing a meme. This is about perception. And we as photographers are out there perceiving the world in a particular way and then editing that world by choosing to view it from here rather than from there, to crop it this way. And then when we go and edit it as well in a program, we boost certain colours and we play with shadows and we play with light and when we've got the finished object, the finished picture, this is the way it is. This is how we see it, and we can't see it any other way. And yet, other people could see it in a dramatically different way. I've talked plenty before about the fact that people can see it different ways, just quite simply because their monitor is calibrated slightly differently. So there some monitors are sort of slightly yellow shifted, some are blue shifted. So you will get variations on that. And that's what I thought was the whole problem with the grey, green, pink, white shoe. But there is also this notion of perception of colour. And I find that super fascinating. I've often suspected, I've had various conversations over the years with my wife about the fact that I suspect she sees colour slightly differently to me, that she sees richer things, because a number of times over the years we've been out for a drive somewhere and she's pointed to a grey sea or a grey sky where I've just seen grey, and she's talked about the richness of the colour in that, which I just haven't seen. Now, I'm not colourblind, and I pass all the tests for when you've got the coloured dots making out a number or letter or something, which you wouldn't see if you were colourblind. But we still have this thing. We don't know how other people see. We make the assumption that other people see the world in the same way we do. And they don't. And of course, we know this also emotionally. We don't perceive the world the same way. The fact that people do vote for different political parties. The fact that people do have different beliefs in different faiths. The fact that people will even support different football teams. Our perception of the world is shaped partly by our genetics and then partly by our environment and our upbringing and our experiences. And I suppose in a bit long roundabout way, this always brings me back to what I often talk about, the fact why I love photography and why I love sharing photography and why I love things like this podcast and the people who take part, is the privilege of getting to see how other people see the world. Each time you take a photo, you take a different photo than the one that I would take. And I find that absolutely brilliant, because it then takes me to a different place where I wouldn't go. And I think if you can approach photography with that idea of seeing the way other people photograph as inspiration or just a little journey into another way of looking into the world, then it can help stop that imposter syndrome where you're just feeling, oh, they're better than me, I'm no good, they're doing something different, therefore they must be right, which all of us feel at some point or another. Instead, enjoy the journey of other people's perception. Now, I'll just close that and flip back and actually see, because I think there's a few more comments coming in here. Oh, Inga's joined us. Hi, Inga. I don't know whether you got in at the end of that grey-green shoe thing. If not, you can go and take a look at it a bit later. Ben says, I don't know. Now Ben knows a lot about colour. What are you saying? I don't know if it's relevant to this phenomenon, but people are highly variable in their sensitivity to blue light. Okay. Why it may not be relevant is that this seems like something that's varying along a red-green dimension rather than a blue-yellow one. Yeah, it's a kind of tricky one. Certainly, the slider I was using was a kind of magenta green slider, and it makes a huge difference. Stacey says, I'm sorry, she's mowing the lawn that's grown a foot. Beautiful sunny day, get it done. We'll catch up later. Okay, so you've leapt in to tell us you're mowing. Well, I hope you get your lawn mowed. Enjoy the show later when you watch it on catch up. Morven says, I walk with a friend and we both take pictures, and I often wonder if we have been on the same walk. Our pictures are so totally different. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I've talked before about the fact, that idea that if I stand on the side of a lake with near sunset with a landscape photographer and a wildlife photographer, the landscape photographer will be looking at the shape of the mountains, the reflection on the water, the way the light is falling, and all the rest of it. The wildlife photographer will be noticing the way the birds are swooping, or if fish are jumping, or there's a squirrel running up the tree, and I'll be busy photographing the two of them because it's people that I tend to be interested in. So we all perceive the world in a different way. John says, it's to do with the photoreceptors at the back of the eye. Just like we all feel pain differently, have different skin tones, have different body shapes, the back of the eye in people is equally different regarding the number and sensitivity of photoreceptors. It's a physical thing. No one will ever see the world the same. That's really interesting, John. Yeah, that certainly makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Jackie says it may be due to the fact that we see things in different ways. This is what we'll be chatting to you. And Benedito saying, evening to you, Maggie. So that was like a kind of interesting, funny little diversion, but interesting nonetheless. I think it's worth kind of exploring that idea. Now, I don't know quite how it's coming across on thing. When I look at my little screen on OBS over here, I seem to be looking darker than I usually do. The lighting's exactly the same as I always have it, so I don't know whether I've got something on the screen, so or maybe just my perception has changed. So what we're going to do now is move on to the critique section. But just before I get to that, just to remind you that these podcasts, if you find them interesting, if you find them entertaining, if you find them educational, if you would like to support them in any way, then buymeacoffee.com is the place to go to. Now, also the other thing is that these are recorded and they're put on YouTube. So youtube.com/Kim Ayres. You can find all the previous 53 episodes before this one, including last week's anniversary edition, and also the other thing is whilst this is recorded, I put it up on over after the podcast is over, I edit it, put it up on YouTube, and then I embed it in my blog. I write a blog post in the morning. So kimayres.blogspot.com. If you go there anytime from kind of Wednesday lunchtime onwards, you can generally find a blog post which is loosely attached to or the podcast. The podcast is embedded in the blog, and sometimes I write about things that have happened or been inspired by the podcast, and sometimes it's kind of I go off on a tangent, which is has little to do with it. But if you are into blogs, a little bit of reading, would like to know a little bit about my thoughts about some of these podcasts, then my blog is the place to go for that. Right. Okay. So, what was that? Benedito says your top is darker. Actually, I usually wear a dark shirt, but I think it's just, I do think the light is... Oh, Ben says, have you caught the sun over the last few days? And oddly enough, I was wondering about that. I think I possibly have caught the sun a little bit. Each morning, Maggie and I go to the shed at the end of the garden to have our coffee. And the sun's been out a few days. We've been sitting out the back, and I tend to forget that, whilst it still feels cold and winter, we got snowed on the other day, the sun is still pretty hot at this time of year. So it's quite possible that, yes, I think I maybe have caught the sun a little bit. Anyway, where are we now? All right, Roy's replying to Stacey, what colour is your grass? Yes, is it green and grey, or is it pink and white? Um, and when Stacey said it had grown a foot, Ben says, I had a vision of a lawn with a foot growing out of it. Sandra thinks the lighting in here looks darker than usual. Okay. And Benedito says 10 minutes is enough to start to tan you. Okay, well, yeah, we're quite often sitting out there for about 40-45 minutes, occasionally an hour, chatting away over our coffee. So, yeah, maybe that's it then. Oh, Rosie's late to the party. Well, she says, hello, Kim and everyone. Sorry I'm late to the party. Okay, so you can have a bit of fun, and you can email me as well. I put up a picture, whether you can decide whether the shoe is grey or green or pink and white, and you can let me know afterwards. VG says, worked for 7 years in an ophthalmic hospital. The photoreceptor cells, called cones, they respond to light differently and are responsible for the difference in colour vision. So yeah, we have that aspect, those aspects. So I guess those rods, and I think John was talking about that earlier with the kind of the receptors and what have you. Everybody's got them slightly differently, so that will account for maybe how people are seeing things. Excellent. Okay. All right, and Benedito's now joining in that thread where he says, I have visions of Monty Python cartoon feet now growing out of the lawn. Yeah. Right, well, okay, that can be somebody's assignment for next week, is to Photoshop a bunch of feet sticking out of a lawn for Stacey. Okay, so what we're going to talk about now is we're going to move on to the critique section. So we haven't done this for a couple of weeks. Last week we had the anniversary edition where everybody was putting in their best photo. The week before we had the self-portrait challenge where everybody was putting in amazing self-portraits. So it's been 3 weeks since we last had a critique. So for those who are new or have kind of forgotten the way these podcasts usually work, the critique section is here for you, where you can stick in your images to get feedback on problems, sticking points, bits where you're kind of struggling a bit. So we all have photos which we're happy with, and that's great. You don't need any help with those. But then we have the photos where you go, there's something not quite. I was trying to achieve something and I was struggling with it. Or I've got something, I know it's kind of okay, but something's not working. And you really could do with proper feedback, a little bit of critique from somebody who can give you another view on it. And that's what this section is here for. So if you haven't done already, join the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Easy enough, just type that phrase into Facebook, up it comes. And then put your photo in to the group. Let me know where your sticking point is, whether you were struggling with the lighting, the crop, the layout, particular aspects of composition. Or even sometimes what happens is that very periodically we get people who put a picture in and go, this is a picture I really like, but it never tends to do very well in the photo competitions. Got any insights? So, anything you happen to be struggling with, put it in, and then following podcast, hopefully I can get a chance to take a look at it and give you some feedback. So that's what we're going to talk about now. So the first one I'm going to look at today is we're going to look at VGs, I think. So VG has sent in this this photo. She says, sorry for the late submission. It was in fact taken for the Still Life Challenge. Now that's going back a couple of months, I think. But I didn't submit it during the time. The arrangement, the jewellery box, the objects, how better could I take to place them? I had a black vinyl sheet at the base and background. Well, she also says she hasn't been feeling too well today, hence the delay. So I hope you're feeling a little bit better, VG. If you're not, get an early night. Come watch this on catch up as well. I mean, VG in India is... Now we've moved the clocks forward, but she's still 4.5 hours behind. So it is currently about 12:30 at night. So, if you're not feeling too good, make sure you get your sleep. But I thought I would deal with this one early, just in case you insist on staying up for a little bit longer. So it's really how to lay it out a little bit. I mean, it's a lovely photo. You've got this fantastic kind of, is it wood and leather? Or is it just carved wood? But beautiful... and nice little kind of metal catch on it, and you've got all these bangles and bracelets and coins, a real treasure chest, fun kind of thing to do. Putting it on the black vinyl, the black is then just a way of kind of not detracting attention from the box and the jewelry. I suppose what kind of the first thing that strikes me is what you've got is the where the catch is, that's sharply in focus, that's okay, but it kind of starts going out of focus as you get down a little bit further into here. Maybe if you'd had a slightly narrower aperture, you could have had a little bit sharper focus all the way through. I think that could have worked a little bit better, but I mean I quite like it. I think there's a nice colour to it. There's a nice sense of story to it. We immediately get that feeling of jewels and wealth and pirate treasure or whatever it is. Now, in terms of layout and composition, let's throw this into Photoshop because there is a little thing which kind of okay, let's just close that one of Helena so it's not taking it. Now, one of the things I'm struck with, I suppose, with this photo mostly is that the box itself is tilted so it's facing the right, it's turned to the right. You've got a kind of bunch of coins and what have you, and these earrings I think down here in the bottom left, but that kind of, they spill over to the left a bit, and it feels to me like because the box is turned slightly to the right, that your eye wants to sort of travel down the length of it's almost like a face turning one way. You turn your face this way and you kind of want to know what you're looking at. You turn your face that way, and it's slightly different from if it had been straight on. So as it's kind of going that way, I kind of feel like I want a little bit more room to the right, or maybe slightly. I think this earring over here on the left, I think is just sort of a bit too far left. I think you could, if you'd taken this jewelry and sort of moved it a bit further over to the right, you could have used it to sort of create like a little leading line diagonal coming up. So what I'll do here is just to sort of show you a slightly different way of doing it. Now, there's a couple of different ways you could do this. You know, you could do a kind of, I suppose, you know, if you were to make it, I'll use the content aware fill thing just to kind of, you know, so you can kind of create it and this way. Now, again, what I think I will do, I'm going to grab a little bit of extra jewelry around here, copy that, paste it, and then move it over a little bit. So it's like we've got a little bit of extra jewelry. Now, can I layer that in a way that would, yeah, if I lighten, color, lighter color, something like that. Not absolutely perfect, but it gives you a sense of, do you see what I mean? That the jewelry can kind of draw your eye up. At this point, I think, now I'm aware that my head is in the way of some of this, so I'll just pull this back out a bit. This bit over here still feels a little bit too much, so I would kind of want to just take some of that back out a little bit, something like that. So it's only curving a little bit. We could maybe have it coming out a touch, but that's that idea. Or what we could do is I'll just put that there for the moment. You could, instead of having it that way, we could actually make it more kind of portrait. Let's just fill that for the moment. Still not doing it. Okay, doesn't matter. I'll tell you what, let's just fill in the gap with a little bit of paintbrush. So it looks a bit longer. And then if we pull this coins in, you could kind of pull it down this way a little bit. And well, at that point, maybe you just need that a little bit wider. But do you see what I mean? That I think use the jewelry to kind of create a leading line, a nice diagonal kind of coming up to the box. But because the box is sort of turned to one side, I think you kind of need the jewelry coming in that direction. If the jewelry if the drawing coins is sort of spilling out too much over to the other side, they're kind of pulling you in opposite directions. Whereas this way, it feels like it's sort of flowing in the same direction. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say about that, VG. I hope that gives you some ideas. You're asking about the notion of what you could have done with the composition, and I think something like that. And then, you know, other things you can do: play around with texture, play around with the background, play around with lighting. But it's a lovely box, lovely collection of. You know, I like the color scheme to it as well. Lots of texture. Like I said, the only other thing I could really say, I suppose, is maybe if you'd done a narrower aperture, it would have given a little bit more sharpness all the way through. But there you go, lovely photo. So thanks for sharing that one, VG. I hope you found that useful. Okay. What else have we got here? Okay, so Becca's joining us a bit late. Oh, that's okay, Becca. I'm sure you're going. You can take a look at the first part of this a bit later. And right, what else have we got? Oh, there's a whole conversation going on with Stacey and her lawn at the moment. So I'll just, if you want to read that, you can. Oh yeah. So VG says it was a leather chest, not wooden. Morvin says. Too late for me to absorb the quantity of info. Totally interesting, but we'll pick it up tomorrow when I have a brain capacity. Enjoyed what I've watched thus far. That's fine, Morven. Yeah, so for some people it's just kind of a late start to start kind of talking about too much of the technical stuff. VG says looks lovely. I get it now. Thanks, Kim. Inga says very interesting about the composition. Excellent. Good. Glad people are getting positive, a good sense of what I'm talking about. Right. Okay. So. Next up then, we're going to go to Benedito. So what Ben did was he sent in, let me just close that and find, so he sent me two images. So the first one says, a short visit to Petworth just to get out and see if I could find a shot. Here is the boathouse. I shot portrait mode to include the goose in the corner, to give the image a diagonal to lead the viewer. So what you can see here then is because the goose is down in the bottom left corner on a diagonal, kind of creates a bit of a diagonal line between the goose and the boathouse there. But it sort of feels a little bit, is it really doing what he wanted to? And at this point, Ben says, not so well. It says, unlike the other image I submitted a few weeks back, where I allowed the subjects, the moon and the ship, a bit more room to breathe inside the image. Here, this gap, I feel, has become too big to become a subliminal lead into the image, and thus the two become disconnected. Your thoughts on that? And I think you're right with that. I think you know what you have here is it does feel like two pictures. You've got the picture of the goose, and you've got the ripples around it. In the loch or the lake, and that's sort of one photo, and then you've got the boathouse up here, maybe a few ducks on the water, the entrance, trees in the background, and that then feels like a second picture. And so I think you're right really here, Ben, that I can understand absolutely why you decided to do that. I've got a photo not dissimilar in that layout where I've got a swan in the foreground and some trees in the background, but there was a lot more mist in that slightly different thing, but it can work. But on this occasion, didn't. So what Ben decided to do was to crop the image to the boathouse and use the two pines in the background to contrast it to the light stone. The conversion to black and white was to give a better contrast throughout the image and to make the boathouse pop from the background. So this was then the version that Ben did. And certainly I think that you did right to just say, well, okay, the goose isn't really working for this. Let's try and let's just scrap that. At this point, though, really, I think we end up with the fact that you've taken a portrait shot, started to make it a bit landscape, but it doesn't quite feel landscape enough. I think this will work better just, again, if I use the content-aware crop. And if we just sort of stretch that out a bit, maybe you don't need quite as much sky. You've got the trees there, that's enough, but the sky is not really doing well. So I would actually pull that down to just above the tip of that tree. Maybe we could stretch it out a little bit more this way, keep that keep the boathouse roughly rule of thirds, but make that a little bit more landscape, something like that, I think. And then I think that kind of crop feels slightly better to me. I think there's your boathouse is then sitting fully kind of rule of thirds bit. I think you're right. There's a nice kind of contrast between the darkness of the pine trees and the sort of lightness of the stone there. That light part of the wall creates a nice little diagonal that comes up here. It's being repeated down in this corner, which of course it wouldn't if you'd actually taken the photo. That's just the autofill kind of thing, grabbing another bit and putting it in. But at that point, maybe if you slightly vignetted the corners or something like that, I think it would work really well. So yeah, I think it was a good call, Ben. I think the at that point, you know, I can see you were right. You go for it, you try and get the goose, create that kind of diagonal connection, but if the gap's too big, it just isn't really working, at which point you then turn your attention to this. But in order to make that work, I think probably you just turn your camera back round and take a landscape version of it. So thanks for sending that one in, Ben. Right, okay, let me close that, and close that. Right. Okay, Inga says, very interesting about composition. Oh, that was a previous one, I think. Ben, thumbs up, good. Glad that was useful. Inga says, I agree, much better in cropped version and even better with the extension. Cool. Okay, right. So, next one up is, there's a more kind of conversational thing. I'm not going to be making any edit tweaks here. Oh, just Jim's come in. Content aware is a handy tool. It's a very handy tool. One of the great things of Photoshop, and it's got so much better over the years. One of the great things, I'm on, slight diversion for anybody who's interested. A lot of people use Photoshop, but they're still using kind of the older version, because where you would buy the CD and every couple of years they would update it to a point whereby you would then buy the latest version. A few years ago, they swapped to a subscription model, and a lot of people I know are still using an old version of Photoshop. Well, it still works, it still does most of what it needs to do, and they've got the hard copy of it. And if they update their computer, they update that. The subscription version, you pay, well, in my case, roughly about £10 per month, and that gives me Photoshop and Lightroom together. Not that I ever use Lightroom, but Photoshop. The main thing about it is that it's every couple of weeks, it's sort of updating itself. So you're always getting the latest version. And where it has really progressed over the last couple of years has been in its autofill. If you're taking patches and you're sort of moving things about, if you're removing things, if you're extending pictures, it's got incredibly good. It's not always perfect, but there are certain things it does really, really well. And it certainly does an awful lot better than it used to. So for £10 a month, I think it's a really good deal if you're doing a lot of editing. If you're not doing a lot of editing, don't worry about it. But for those who sort of are already a little bit, you know, they do use Photoshop already, I would recommend using the subscription service if you're not already. And I don't get paid for saying that. I'm not being sponsored by Photoshop. I'm hoping one. That'd be great, wouldn't it? Start emblazoning the podcast with a nice kind of sponsored by Adobe Photoshop on the side. Okay, what else have we got here? Jackie says she often uses it. Jim says, I use Affinity Photo subscription, free updates. Okay, well, I don't know about Affinity, but if you recommend it, Jim, then that's certainly one for others to take a look at as well. That's good. Thank you. Right, so now, what we're going to talk next about is Bob. Oh, just quickly, Benedito says, I subscribe and I use both Lightroom. Lightroom is great as an art to use. It's great to use anyway. So the next picture we want to talk about. So Bob put this one in last week, and it was first Bob just recently kind of came over, joined the group, put a photo in. We were just at that point, everything was running towards doing the anniversary edition. I wasn't doing critique or what have you. So I said, well, look, if you're okay, I'll just roll this over to next week. He said, yeah, that'd be fine. So Bob may or may not come back and take a look at what we say here. But I think it was quite interesting that what Bob said was, for critique, I've often been in a debate with other photographers about bees, whether the bees should have their wings blurred or not when flying. My own preference calls for some blur to show motion. And I suppose that's one of those things. It is. This one was taken at an 8,000th of a second at f5.6 ISO 800 for those who want the technicals. It surprises me, actually, at 8,000th of a second that the wings are blurred. I would have thought that would have... I find that quite strange. I really would have thought that would have captured it pin sharp. There are wildlife photographers amongst us. Perhaps, Rosie, maybe you've got a better idea on that, although I know I don't think I've seen you put in insects as such, but or not flying insects at any rate. But yeah, Rosie, if you happen to know on what you would need, how fast would you need it to actually capture something like the wings of a bee still? If that was 800th of a second, I could maybe imagine that it might still be slightly blurry, because they can go at quite a rate. 8,000th, I really would have thought it would have caught it. Anyway, it's me mumbling into my beard over this. The question then is if you can capture the bee fast enough so that the wings are static, should you? And I think it partly comes... There is this notion of having the movement blur certainly shows that it's movement, that it is moving. If it was just static, could be hanging in midair. I think the fact that it's not actually on the flower, you would know that it was still in flight. I think the danger comes in if you don't have it fast enough that actually the bee itself then isn't as sharp. And I think in something like this, when we look at this photo, the edge of the foxglove here is beautifully sharp. That's where your depth of focus has come in. Now, you're using a 105mm lens, so you've not got a lot of leeway in your depth of focus. A narrow aperture would have given you a little bit more. So whether the bee has got slight movement blur or whether it's just slightly the other side of the primary focal point, I'm not sure. The bee itself doesn't feel as sharp as you would really ideally like. And what we're talking here is sort of perfection photos. I don't know the level at which you normally take photos. For some of us, just to capture a bee would be, well, hey, I got a bee. It doesn't really matter if it's half out of focus. But if you're taking it to the next level, which is I'm really wanting to, grab this at a much higher level. And one of the things we find is maybe the back part of this bee here, we can see some of the little kind of hairs quite clearly, but when we get to the front, the face is more out of focus. So, I mean, I would guess then if you had a narrow aperture, you would maybe have more chance of getting the whole bee in focus. So at this point, it's slightly difficult to know whether the lack of focus is also whether it's that or whether it's to do with slight motion blur because it's not actually fast enough. So, do you have the motion blur with the wings or not? If the bee is absolutely static and the wings are blurred, but the bee itself is pin sharp, then I think that's probably really cool and excellent. If you've got the bee sharp and you've got the wings sharp, I think that could be quite interesting too. Probably more likely to get that once the bee has landed. But I think really it's a case of, it's about you've got to get the bee body and particularly the bee head sharp. I think with any animal, people included, the bit that's the most important bit is the face. Unless, I mean, very occasionally, if somebody's doing something where they're, pointing their finger right out at the thing and maybe you're focused on the finger and the person behind is out of focus, that's okay. But that's a different stylized thing. In a case like this, I think the primary thing is that you have to get the bee itself in as sharp a focus as you can and pretty much worry about the wings afterwards. But if anybody's got any particular thoughts as to whether they feel that absolute heresy to have blurred wings or absolute, is it absolute nonsense to feel that you've got to have pin sharp wings, then do leave a comment. I'd be interested in your opinion on that. So thanks for sending that one in, Bob. That was interesting. So what have we got here? Various people talking then about Photoshop and whether it's useful or whether to have a go at using Affinity. Sandra's using Photoshop Elements, which is the latest version you can buy with a one-off payment. So yeah, lots of conversation go. Pap says great photo of the bee. So there you go. None of you are looking at the bee. None of you care. You're too busy chatting about Photoshop. Right. Okay, let's have a little. Let's move on then. Oh no, actually Ben's come in. Maybe we've got this problem with the fact that I'm 20 seconds ahead of the rest of you. So Ben says, is this a case of what story you want to tell? One story is that bees' wings are beautiful, and the other story is bees' wings flap, really. I think both are interesting and they complement each other. Yeah, no, it's a very good point, Ben. It is one of those things of what's the important bit to you. But either way, whether it's static wings or blurry wings, I still think you need to get the bee itself in focus. Otherwise, it's blurry bee. Fine, actually, if it's all about the flower and you've just got a kind of few blurred bees around it. But in this case, it wasn't about the flower. It was about the bee and the flower, and the bee is the bit that was the important bit. Oh, Rosie's come in and said, I just looked up my insect settings. I usually like to get insects, but I did manage to get a hummingbird hawk moth at 1000/2000th of a second. I personally like a little movement in the wings. Inga says, hard to get the bee and the flower sharp. Great photo. And Rosie's comment has just repeated itself on my thread here. But no, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, thousandths to 2000th of a second. You try saying that 3 times quick. Mouth isn't going to cope with it. My mouth isn't anyway. Cool, right, okay, well thanks for looking that one up, Rosie. So next then, we're going to move on to Inga. So Inga had 2 versions of a photo. So I had a few 2 versions of photos in this one. Because we've also got Roy's 2 versions of a photo to come as well. But let's go to, where are we, Inga? So Inga says, I have 2 versions of this photo. In the darkest one, the building pops out more, while the surroundings are not detailed or very clear. More difficult to decide the time of day, maybe a bit more mysterious. In the second, where the light is adjusted, there you go, lighter version, one can see the people are enjoying a nice bright sunny day. Of course, these tell different stories, which depend on what the aim is, but I would like your view of the 2 versions. So what have we got here? We've got the darker version, we've got the lighter version. With the darker version, it then is all about the hut and the fence, to the point whereby it's so dark, even the roof virtually disappears. You've got a bit of the line on the roof there, but it's kind of falling into the background. There are people down in amongst here, and if we zoom right in, we can just about make them out. But they are not really coming into play in the story. The only thing that hits you is the building. The question then is the building enough on its own to really keep, to grab and to keep the attention? I mean, it's an interesting building, but then because everything else is dark, it just seems to kind of feel like it's hanging in the middle of nowhere, I think. Whereas when you go to the lighter version, we can now see the trees in the background. We then start to get a better sense of these little dots, that we've got birds in the foreground, that we've got people on the beach, that looks like there's maybe people having picnics up here, walking. I think it's really a much fuller picture. Now, maybe if you feel at this point that it's more about the place, you maybe want to, the building is still very overpowered, is quite overpowering because it is catching the light so much. I think it's really a case of, in the editing processes, Inga, is just playing with the light balance. I mean, if we'll just quickly do this. So I pull this into Photoshop, and what I'll do is just quickly use Camera Raw for, because that tends to, now if I click Auto, you see that brightens up the background even more, and at that bit I think I quite like it. If you know, I mean, this is the lighter one, but it sort of shows you how dark the other one was even further. And now because we've got more in the way of trees, and I think some of the other details are starting to pick out. The building itself is interesting, but it's now the anchor for what else is going on, rather than only being about the building. You could, if you wanted, if we took the highlights and dragged that down, just actually darken, or take the whites down a little bit, just darken the building a little touch. You could even take the optics, give it a little bit of vignette, pull it in a little bit at the sides, and then even play with the clarity a little bit, just sort of a little bit of contrast, something like that. And so you've kind of gone from that to that, and I think at this point it's got much more of a story of a place to visit. It's by the lake or the loch. You've got all the trees and the woodland, and you've got the people in it, and it feels like a much kind of fuller, busier kind of photo. Whereas, if we go back to your original and the darker version, it's only about that sort of front bit of the building. You know, this patch of white here catching the sun is drawing all the attention to the point whereby it excludes pretty much everything else, I think. So yeah, it does depend on the story you want to tell, whether it's just about that building, in which case maybe you would even crop it differently, because if it's only about the building, you don't necessarily need all that bit off to the left and to the right, left and above. So, you know, you maybe even kind of come in closer and do something like this, because that's really what your story is about. But if your story is about the setting and the people enjoying the setting, then I think when we sort of pull up the light, you know, all of the details into the background, I think it then becomes a much more interesting photo. So I hope that helps a bit, Inga. Thank you for sending that in. So let's close that and flick back. So, okay, Rosie's wondering if the B shot was taken with aperture priority. Excuse me. Quite possibly. We'll just have to see if Bob comes back. Leave a comment on Bob's photo in the Facebook group, and maybe he'll respond to it. I mean, carry that one on during the week. Jim says, light one is good with more details and interest. Too much detail lost in the dark one. Inga says, the point with the hut hanging in the middle of nowhere explained a lot. Thanks. Okay, good. I'm glad that helped. Right. Okay. So, where we are now then. So, Roy. Okay. So, Roy sent in 2 photos. And this time he was talking about, he would like my comments. So let me just go and find Roy's photos, and here we go. So let's click that. So Roy was up at a wind farm, and he says, would like your comment on these 2 photos. The day was bright and cold, and I wanted to capture the quite eerie feeling you get when standing close to these giants going whoosh, 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 as they turn in the wind. I had to use an ND filter to allow slow enough shutter speeds, 1/8 and 1/6 of a second, to capture the movement. So there's this one and there's this one. So this one, there's more blur in the movement as opposed to this one where there's a little bit of blur, but not much. That one's got more blur in it. Roy says, I prefer the slightly more blurred one, but I haven't quite captured the mood of the moment. I may enter one into the movement round of the Amateur Photographer of the Year competition. So at this point we're talking shutter speed again, and I suppose kind of overlapping a little bit with Bob and the B. is how much movement do you want? Now, one of the things about these giant wind turbines is if you shoot it too fast so that there is no movement, it's not obvious that it's turning at all. You could have just turned up on a very calm day and taken a static one. So I think the blur then does become really quite important. Now, you haven't given me the rest of your details on this, Roy, so I don't know what your aperture settings or anything else was. But I understand that problem of if you're in really bright sunlight and you want to create movement blur, you've got to go for a really slow shutter speed. But when you go for a slow shutter speed, a lot more light ends up getting into the lens. So the first thing to do is make sure that your ISO is set as low as you can get it. So set your ISO at 100, if that's as low as it will go, and that will give you the best quality, and it also starts cutting out the light you can. The next thing to do is start adjusting your aperture. Get your aperture pretty much as narrow as you can. Now, you do have to be slightly careful that some lenses, if you've got it at their absolute narrowest you get, you kind of lose a bit of quality. So sometimes 1 or 2 stops back from, if it's goes up to f22, maybe go to f18 or something like that. Or if it goes to f32, maybe go to f22. Have a couple of stops back from the absolute narrowest it will go, because that you don't always get the best quality at the limit of the lens. Having said that, it does depend on the lens, so you will need to try that out, Roy. But yes, what you are looking for then is to slow this down even more. And then you've put an ND filter, neutral density filter, over it, which is, for anybody who doesn't use those kind of filters, it's pretty much like sticking sunglasses on the front of your lens. It's letting less light in, and because you're doing that, that means you can slow the shutter speed down even further. And in fact, for that matter, if you're converting it to black and white anyway, you probably could stick sunglasses over the front for an extra layer of darkness. And I think with something like this, you kind of want to get it as slow as you can. Maybe even going back on I think with something like this, what would be really good is if you could get there kind of during the golden hour, when the sun is lower in the sky. At that point, there's going to be less light on it and less ambient light as well, which will allow you to slow down your shutter speed a little bit more. Also, then, the other thing is depending on the angle you're at. Now, obviously, you're at this point whereby you want to be kind of as face onto it as possible in order to get that, full sense of almost like a propeller kind of thing going. But ideally, it would be quite nice if you had the sun sort of to one side of it. Now, looking at the shadow in this, it looks like the sun is face onto it as well as the wind being face onto it. And so you are in a kind of slightly tricky situation that you've got the full sunlight hitting it face on. Whereas again, if the sun was slightly round to the side compared to where it was spinning, you would have slightly less light falling onto it. You would have a little bit more shadow. And again, that would allow you maybe 1 or 2 extra increments of slowing down the shutter speed. So you're right at the edge of this. And I think if you've got the chance to go back to this place, if it's not too far away from you, revisit it during different times of the day, different lighting conditions, different weather conditions even. Yes, I think the idea of having the cloud in the background, adding the texture is really nice. If it was just a dull, whited out day, I think that would be really dull. Wouldn't be very interesting. You do want a rich cloud background. Now, whether it's scattered clouds on a blue sky or whether it's just one of those kind of stormy, very textured kind of clouds, either of those would work, but you do want a good textured sky because that's taking up a lot of the picture. But to get that sort of maximum amount of movement blur, you're obviously trying to get the shutter speed as slow as possible. And so try the other lighting conditions. Get it when the sun is low in the sky. Get it when the sun is at a different angle so it's not hitting it face on. And I think these things will allow you those extra couple of stops down on your shutter speed to get that little bit, capture that little bit more blur, which I think is what makes it interesting. So hope that helps, Roy. Thanks for sending those ones in. Okay, where are we at? Okay, bits of comment. So April saying hi everyone, hope all is well, glad you could make it. April, conversations back and forth, still talking about Photoshop. VG says the wind turbine is chasing the clouds away, lovely one. April saying exhausted from work, I work with students with moderate to severe disabilities, nice to chill with the podcast. Cool. Well, it's nice to know that I'm a kind of place to come and unwind as well. That's good. So right, okay, little bits of conversation going. So that's right. Okay, nobody's as yet really chipping in on Roy's wind turbines, but I think pretty much what I've said Roy ought to cover most of it. Okay, so what we're going to do now is move on to the last of the images this evening, which is Jim. Now, this is an interesting one. Jim's been playing with composites. Excuse me. So let me find Jim's photo. And Jim says, "Hi Kim, I made this composite a wee while ago. Pewillimont Beach. It's a lovely, lovely beach about 25-ish miles from where I am at the moment. And 3 marbles photographed separately. I introduced a false light source from the right-hand side." Oh, actually, and then he corrected that. He meant the left-hand side. "To what I thought enhanced the overall image. Any critique welcome, marbles and beach. I was dabbling with the idea of composite. I have a lot of beach photos and thought of using marbles, enlarged of course. I think maybe I've seen something similar somewhere and thought I would try it out. I've not tried anything similar, anything like this before or since." Okay, so what becomes interesting with this is part of it is a case of what narrative, what are you trying to achieve? Because composites kind of come in 2 flavours. There's composite where you know it's a composite because it's more like a collage. Things have been kind of quite clearly cut out and stuck on, and it's that collage effect that you're going for. Then there's the other kind of composite where you are trying to get such a blend in place that it's not obvious that it's been stuck on. That in this case it might look like there really were giant marbles, you know, 1 metre across or something, sitting on the beach next to the rocks. Now, this I would say looks more former than latter. They still do look a bit more cut out than naturally blending in. The fact that you have introduced the idea into it, I mean, if we look, you know, you've added shadows down under here. Looks like you've added a kind of light bit here, as though there's a light coming in, grabbing the shadows. Makes me think that what you've been trying to do is make it look as naturalistic as possible, but you've run into a few problems because it doesn't quite work. So what I'm going to do now then is just try and talk about a couple of the reasons why that might be and what you would have to do differently. And it is all about, needless to say, light and also shadow. And first of all, you've got, if you look at these little kind of shadows coming off the globes, whereas you look at this light over here, the way you've done the light here, it looks like there's a flash or single light source coming in from the left. Just, you know, we follow this light form back, it creates a triangle coming into, you know, so we know there's a light source there. But if the light source was there, these shadows wouldn't point that way. These shadows would be aligned coming out from that line. So whereas, well, that shadow of the middle marble here might work, but this shadow in the foreground would actually be more aligned with this shadow that's coming down on the sharp diagonal of the left, and the shadow of this one would be pointing pretty much straight ahead. So you've got that. Then you've got the problem of the light and the reflections, and it looks like window light reflecting in the marbles at the top of the marbles here, but more importantly at the bottom. And the simple fact is that if these were sitting directly on the sand, they would be reflecting the sand and the shadow of the sand beneath them. So they would in fact be darker on the bottom than they are on the top. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Just going to play a little bit in Photoshop. These will be rough, but that's okay. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what can be done. So I'll make a copy of that layer because I'm going to play around with it in a minute. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I want to cut these out just so that I've got a place to kind of show you what I'm going to do. So, not that, not right. So I'll do that, and then I'll copy and paste that. Then I'll take this one. Just quickly try and do that without looking in the wrong place. Let's take out a little bit of, this is going to be, okay, this is going to be a little bit rough, but it doesn't really matter. So I'll copy and paste that, and then come back here, and then, so all I'm trying to do at the moment is cut out the marbles so that we can use them independently of the background. So then what I will do is I'll just go to this background, and then I will use the patch tool, the heal tool, and just get rid of those and that little bit of shadow as well. So then what we can do is we can place these back on independently of it. Now, what I would say with this is part of the problem that you've got is to go back to what I was saying about the way light and shadow falls, and that if you've got a sphere, what you really want to do is you want to have, it will be lighter at the top and then it will be darker at the bottom. And what I'd be very tempted to do is, let's say, let's go back to, no, not that, sorry, that tool. Okay, select that, yes. So I'm selecting this one here. Now, what I could do with this is if I create a gradient map, not a gradient map, yeah, gradient tool, and I'm going to use, so let's put this on a separate layer for the moment. Need to turn that black as well. Sorry, this is, there we go. Now if I do that, now what you can see here is it's darkening in a kind of curve way. I'm not doing, up the top here, I've got this on the kind of circular gradient map. So similarly then with this one, so let's just do the same kind of, so I'm looking at the wrong, not that, there we go. There we go, and go to there, do so there's I've got too many things going on at the same time, so I need to go up to here and I need to do the gradient map on that as well, and I'll tell you, well, you can take it as red, that I've done it on the other one. So having done that, then you can come back here and you can start putting your shadow in. So I will just take the I'll darken the midtones, and then you could, let's deselect. Now if I darken a shadow here, that kind of makes it look like it's kind of coming out. Now you can do it like that, you can have it sort of running to the edge so it looks like it's sort of sitting on the ground, something like that, and I suppose we would come out that way if we're trying to, you can play around a little bit with how you would have your shadow. Interestingly, if you don't quite line it up, it looks like it's kind of hovering above, which is another way of doing it. So if I sort of put the shadow like that, it now actually looks like it's kind of hovering in midair. So that's another option you can play with. There's another option here, which is actually if I remove the marbles, you notice you've then actually got hovering balls in their own right, which are kind of a bit weird. It's a little, which I think can be kind of a bit of fun. Let me just show you that if you just, let's go back, just remove the shadows for the moment. Where were we? Here. So I'll do that, remove these. So if you take a little round selection, so we take a little round selection like that, we'll put this onto a new layer, and then go back to this gradient map that's circular. Now, if you put it dead in the middle, you end up with that. But if you take it from sort of partially up the top, like that, you get much more of a sense of the spherical. And then we can do a few more of these if you wanted. And they're partially see-through as well, so that kind of creates an interesting little effect. So if you want, you can do something like that. And then again, as I said, what you could do is if you then, from that point, take the darken tool, and go back here, and actually have it something like that. It then looks like it is actually floating in midair rather than. So at that point, you don't see the join in the same way that perhaps you did with the original marbles. The marbles, the reflections are kind of, the biggest problem you've got here is the reflections are in the wrong place. But if you want to play with just literally drawing circles and then shading them, you can have these sort of weird semi-transparent things that are going on in there. So I know that probably wasn't really what you were going for, and I apologise if I've taken it too far away from where you originally wanted to go. But I think I kind of got a little bit carried away there. I think it's kind of quite a fun little effect to play with. But it's that the real thing about this is understanding light. Let's go back to your original picture. And why is it work? Well, where does it start to work and where doesn't it work? And the real reason, if it's not working, even though I can see that you've given pull in onto blue shift, presumably to try and tie in with the blue marbles, the problem you've got is the shadows don't sit in the right place. The reflections aren't really how they would be. And really specifically, those reflections on the underneath of the marbles, because you've got a bright bit of window light in the bottom of those marbles. So those reflections down here, you can see here, and it's just not how it would be. And it's to understand that when you are doing any kind of composite, you need to make sure that if it's going to sort of fit apparently seamlessly into the picture, then it needs to be lit from the same angle as the other things that are in the photo. So any other objects, so you've got the light source coming. So if you're doing something in a room, or you're putting something into a room that, you know, you're just photoshopping it in, and there's light coming from the window, you need to make sure that that thing is photographed with the same kind of light. And then you need to make color shifts as well to make sure that if it's blue shifted or yellow shifted or whatever it is, so that it blends in with the color scheme as well as the shadow. And then where the shadows are falling, where the shadow, you know, if you've got an object and there's a light source, there's going to be shadow. Is the shadow in the right place for the light source? Is it as dark as it would be for that light source? And so these kind of things become really important. And so any kind of composite, understanding your lighting and understanding your shadow is of absolute crucial importance. Otherwise, like I say, you can always just play around with, this is a mix then of graphic design and photography as well, to kind of get weird alien shapes floating in midair. Anyway, hope you found that a little bit interesting. So I'll close that, and what have we got? Few more comments. Benedito says, like my Thor self-portrait, that was blended to look like I was actually there. Jim says, totally agree with your light marks. Photos of marbles were taken in the sun lounge at home, and that's it. If you'd almost really need to take the marbles down to the beach under the same lighting conditions, take close-up photos of them, and then adjust them. Rosie says, interesting composite, Jim. Benedito says, I would also change the colour of the white to the pale teal of the light to help the blend. Yeah, absolutely. It's about getting the same kind of colour system that you've got. He also goes on to say, very Asimov art, having balls in the air. April also likes the marbles in the air, playing around with the shadow effect. VG says, the shadow is a brilliant addition, gives the depth. Jim says, thanks for that, Kim, so many great ideas. Sandra says, I like the shaded circles version, more realistic. April says, I would like to see the original blue marbles in the air. VG says, love the grey transparent marbles as well. Benedito says, 4 parts light, brightness, tone. Sorry, 4 parts to light. There are 4 parts to light: brightness, tone, shade, and saturation. And that's absolutely true. Jackie says, I'm with the teal balls version. And Benedito says, Stacey's lawn is posted on the group page. LMAO. And let's go and let me flip over to... No, okay, I was going to try it again. Okay, Ben, we'll just have to take a look later because I'm just slightly worried that my attempt to load another page in this is going to cause me to freeze on the screen. But for anybody who's in Facebook, after this, we'll be finishing in a few minutes, go and take a look in the Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres and see what Benedito has done with Stacey's lawn and feet growing in the lawn. Cool. So... thank you very much to everybody who sent something in. Next week, I haven't decided yet exactly what pictures I'll be doing next week, but we will have the critique section. So stick your pictures in. If you've got problems with any kind of images, or you're just wanting to, or you've got questions you want to ask, anything photographic, stick the questions in. I'll try and answer. If you've got photos that you're struggling with, put them in, and then I'll answer them here in the podcast. And then everybody who's watching gets to share and put in that tuppence worth as well. Good people are saying that I'm back again, so I must have frozen for a little bit. If you found these podcasts interesting, useful, entertaining, and you would like to support them at all, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is the place to do it. Thank you very much once again for everybody who's stuck with me. Slightly shorter one tonight, but a mere hour and a half, as opposed to the 2.5 hour absolute marathon of last week. Okay, a few last people saying good night and thanks for the evening and for the podcast. Thank you all for turning up. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And like I say, just don't forget, stick your images in and any questions or suggestions even, things that you might like to. So into now the 2nd year of our podcast, what kind of things would you like to see? Let me know. Take care. Bye-bye.